let's get started. Welcome and thank you for joining us today to hear more about generative AI or GenAI. We will be discussing roadmaps, best practices, and ethical deployment. I'm Rick Bushnell, coming to you today from Philadelphia, close to our offices in Princeton. And just a little about Pronix. So Pronix is well known for expertise in application development, cloud IT, QA testing, and DevOps. We design and implement data management and digital transformation programs. Also, we provide IT talent to augment your IT teams. We have over 85% of our consultants based right here in the US, so Pronix has become a leader for talent in your time zone or even your location. So today you're going to hear from a number of us with Pronix, and then Kishore has established kind of a world-class panel of some of the people that are at the forefront of generative AI or GenAI. And rather than go through the details of everybody's heavy credentials, here the joy of LinkedIn webinars is you can go look at each of us individually and see our backgrounds if you want to know specifics. But we're basically just going to dive into the conversation. If you have questions, please put them in the questions section. We're generally going to take questions at the end. So please provide them to us, and we're going to leave a little time. Generally, we're going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll look to get into Q&A. So let's get underway. I'm going to start with each panelist a question, and then I'll have the other panelists kind of add in and build, and we'll just keep rotating through. So Ashish, if I can start with you, let's get some good foundation on the definitions of generative AI, GenAI, and what differentiates it from other AI technologies.
Yeah, sure. By the way, thanks for joining in and thanks for inviting me. I think to start off with, right, what is generative AI? In very simple terms, it generates things, right? So think about pictures, think about text, think about like videos, think about anything, right? It just identifies pattern in the data that it was trained on, and it generates like data based on the prompt it receives. So very simply, that's what it does. It was actually introduced in 1960s. Like I know we have in hype, like I was looking up and I found like it was actually introduced in 1960, obviously not in the same form. ChatGPT was the one which kind of made it more popular, but it was in theory and in like academia for a long time. The biggest benefit of generative AI and why it becomes so powerful and attractive for people is how humans can interact with it, right? So let's talk about other technologies for a second in comparison, right? So regular ML AI models, the way you interact with it, like you have to create a very curated type of input for the model to work, and you have to train it, and it'll give you a very mundane output. So think about, right, hey, like it'll give you a data point, right? So you give an input and it'll give an output, and it's very predictive. So those results you'll have the same result every time you ask that question in most cases, right? Where generative AI, you can use natural language, right? The way you talk, like you can basically get a feeling that you're talking to a human when you talk to these models, right? And like spit out all these like large set of information. You can ask for an image or all these things that we just talked about. And that's the biggest power of these generative AI models, right? And that's the biggest reason why they started becoming very popular, because anyone can use it. You don't need special training, you don't need special software, you don't need special machines to interact with these models. Basically, anybody who has phone or any kind of machine, they can just talk to them. That's basically the biggest difference, right? And like Gen AI models, just to set like baseline, they're trained on unsupervised. They're kind of unsupervised supervised neural net models, which don't need labeling, right? That's the other big difference between Gen AI models versus usual AI ML models. Where in AI ML, you're labeling them, creating specific format, as I said, and in Gen AI, you just give all that data that you have, it'll train on it and identifies patterns automatically, identifies which relationship will be between those models automatically. And that's the part it becomes expensive. It's very expensive to train. There are like a very interesting use case. We'll chat more about that, but like that's basically it. That's what generally GenAI is.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Uday, anything that when you're out explaining it to people and helping them just even understand where are we, that you add into that conversation or definitions for them?
Yeah, I think Ashish did a great job explaining that. I think the only other thing that I try to take examples and analogies and helping people understand things or wrap their head around emerging tech. GenAI is emerging tech. So, as an example, today, today for search, Google search is our go-to sort of product, right? That's where we go, right? And Google search doesn't require a whole lot of thinking. Whatever you have in your mind, you type it and you get a response. Now imagine if you could have a smarter search, which is more contextualized, which is more structured in terms of how it responds to you, which has attributes, which has explanations. Now that's what a generative AI product or platform could offer you. It's not there yet, but if we start imagining things, we could be there in the future. And in other words, Google search is probably about to be disrupted, or could be disrupted. Maybe they come up with their own version of a generative AI product that replaces search, or somebody else takes its place.
It'll be interesting. Good. That's a good analogy. Zahi, anything else as you're kind of explaining everybody in the room to get them all to the same place that you add into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So not much to add after what Ashish and Uday mentioned, but if I would say a couple of things. First of all, to reiterate what Ashish said, in the sense that no longer do we users have to adapt ourselves to the machine, to the computer, right? Even with Google search, right? You still need to say like, okay, plus that word. So remember, that's what I'm looking for. But now the machine understands us, right? We're using text, and with the recent release of GPT-4V, the multimodal approach, now you can talk, now you can upload images. So it's much more natural for you. That's one clear distinction. Another one is that typically with AI technologies, they are well positioned to solve one specific problem. It's classification, be it understanding the sentiment of a post or a tweet or what have you. Generative AI, for the most part, is multi-purpose, can solve for many, many tasks. And what I said before, and summarization, and of course, generation in different styles, with the context, of course. So it's in that sense, it's much more impactful across many, many industries and use cases.
Right. Great. Perfect. Well, thank you for getting me clear. At least we'll start there. Uday, how can businesses assess the strategic value of implementing GenAI to even kind of get started and whether they should be there or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's sort of like the $1 billion question everybody's wondering and asking, like, hey, should I be there? Should I wait and watch? What's going on? You can be, so I'm a product guy. I've done some startup, so this idea of like, do I want to be first to the market, or should I be a fast follower? Should I be a laggard, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the answer is always the proverbial, it depends. And so what does it depend on? It depends on what industry you're in, what's your context, who's your customer, what are the opportunities, what are the problems, what are the pain points, what does your budget, innovation budget look like? So you got to factor all those things, but the strategic value really comes from delivering outcomes, delivering benefits to the end user. So if today I subscribe to ChatGPT and spend $20 a month, I was on the free version, and then quickly I realized there were some shortcomings, and they wanted me to get into the paid version, and I got there and I see the benefit. I saw the value, and that's why I felt that trading my $20 for that value was a good trade-off, right? So there's a cost benefit. And so every business that wants to get into that has to think about that. But again, that trade-off is not going to be immediate. You will not find that. So the key is over here is to think about, again, what is best for my customer, and how, what is best for my mission? How do I use this new technology stack as a differentiator from my competition? How do I increase my market share, or can help increase my market share? Can it help make my customers more sticky?
Yeah.
Right? So all those things are considerations that you need to bring in, and there may be times when the answer might be no. Hey, what we do, how we do it, who we serve, that's good enough. We don't have to chase that shiny object, right? And I think that's where I leave it at. One last thing I will also say is that always be curious, always be a student of the market, always even go as far as maybe doing a little experiment. But if you're going to dive, sort of feet and head and hands in, then be very clear on what is it that you're trying to test or deliver.
Good. Zahi, just kind of at the high level, just assessing strategic value, things that you've talked with companies about, or your own company, you guys have been discussing how to place it.
Yeah, I think that I think I'm adopting a slightly more, probably not slightly, but a more extreme approach, which is to say, like, don't wait, okay? Mm-hmm. You don't have the luxury to wait. The question is not when, but where to begin. Okay. And I would say that start by, first of all, look at your strategic goals, right? At the end of the day, you have a business, you're working for a company, you have certain goals. So the first question, or one of the first questions that you want to ask yourself is, how can GenAI solve some of my strategic goals? Improve customer satisfaction, reduce costs, increase revenue, and what's not. And then start to evaluate, okay, how can GenAI help me with that? And then dive a bit further, assess the impact, assess what it would take for you to accomplish that. But yet, for the most part, I would suggest to adopt a top-down approach.
Yeah.
But also give the teams at your company opportunity to experiment here and there, and like to bubble up the knowledge so that the entire organization can learn more about opportunities.
Good. Oh, that's good to have. Ashish, as you're out there discussing it with different companies and inside your own, what are your thoughts? How are you kind of positioning that you should assess, people should assess strategically?
Yeah, I'm going to take a moderate approach here. We had to.
This is good. I like this. We've got all the sides going up.
Yeah. I think well said, both of you, right? So I think it's different perspective. At the same, like I would like to say, like that every company should define a framework how they want to see it, right? So I think none of the approaches would work for the same for all the companies, whatever framework we give, right?
Sure.
One example could be like they can come up with like, hey, let's identify what are the problem, and I think Uday kind of talked about like each company should first think about what are the problems they're trying to solve, right? And then like go to the question, can GenAI help it, right? Usually company, what they do is they see that shiny object, and that's where my moderation comes in. They see the shiny object and they try to fit it in every single place they can think of, right? That's usually sort of a dooms, right? You'll try things out, they won't work, you'll spend money, and then you'll burn from it and you'll just exit. That might be an opportunity lost, right? I think that's why it's very important for companies first to build a framework around how they want to do it. So define the goals, define what are the real problems they're trying to solve, and then objectively ask, is there any need of GenAI, first of all, right? Like, are we trying to automate? Are we trying to improve performance? Do we need to answer faster? Do we need to do more things? Do we need to scale? Bunch of things, right? GenAI can help in multitude of ways. And then see, can GenAI actually help, right? Rather than starting, hey, I have this shiny object and let's implement it everywhere. I think that's how that would be my first recommendation to the companies.
Yeah. As it develops, can we ask GenAI how I should use GenAI to assess GenAI?
We are talking about Matrix now.
So Zahi, kind of building on that, I think this is going to fit right into some of your points. So how can businesses measure the ROI of a GenAI project? Even if you're going to start small, like what are we trying to measure? What are we trying to achieve? How do we know if it's worth continuing?
Yeah, so measuring the ROI for GenAI is not fundamentally different than ROI on other using other innovative technologies, AI, other AI models, and what's not. I would break it down. I would approach it in a similar fashion. I would first try to understand and quantify the benefits from using the given technology. How much money do we save? How many resources? What value can we create from it? Can we now offer, is there an opportunity for us to offer more premium services and premium tiers that will generate more money for us? Can we solve a given ticket faster and in more accurate fashion? How does it affect our bottom line? And so on. And then on the investment, of course, you can do the exercise and you can map out the amount of effort that you will need to invest to create or to build or to buy the solution and how much it will cost, right? So from understanding, coming up with a number of tokens or half a word on average that will be used to feed the LLM machine or model. If you're using proprietary model, if you want to have your own model, how much money will it cost me to train it and to host it and so on. But all those are, you can definitely come up with the equation and come up eventually with a number. What I wish to highlight two things. First of all, in terms of benefits, there are those what I just described as hard benefits, like that you can put some sort of a monetary value to them to the time. But there are also some soft benefits. For sure. I claim that if you use generative AI, your employees will be happier. They would want to work for a place that makes their lives easier, that allow them to be more productive,
right?
And so on. And your customers are very likely to benefit from it as well. So employees happier, retention is better, customers are happy. That's one thing. The second thing, though, in respect to GenAI, is that there is an element of uncertainty, right? We all know about the hallucinations of ChatGPT and the data, the underlying data that might be biased and inaccurate, that could lead to unwanted results. So you need to take that into consideration. You need to say, like, at the end of the day, LLMs are probabilistic models, right? So if 5% of our tickets are not resolved accurately or not prioritized accurately, we have a mistake. How much will it cost us? Add that into the equation to come up with the return, and then, again, apply the typical ROI models to come up with a number that will tell you or guide you into which use cases to adopt first.
Good. I like the way you're thinking of it. Ashish, as you have gotten engaged, any ads that you put in there on just thinking about measuring the ROI?
Yeah. How much time do we have? Like, this is a
this is the teaser, so people can go super deep, right?
Yeah.
No, I think
months. Yeah, as I actually covered it very well. I think there is very less to add, like if we are just talking about like a teaser, right? So the only thing I would like, I think he kind of said it, but he didn't explicitly said it. I would say it like define matrix.
Okay.
Very important. Like before you start any project, define the KPI. Again, this is nothing to do with GenAI.
Right.
I mean, this is just like basic business 101.
Yeah.
Right? Define the matrix KPIs that you're gonna track. Define what are you trying to solve. Same thing, right? What are the problems you're solving? What are the measured results you want to get? And I really like what Tazai said, like add that buffer, right? This is a probabilistic model. There might be error. What is the threshold? What is the error rate on this, right? So for instance, don't go ahead and implement it on a sort of a fighter jet. You don't want that to crash, right? So things like those. So be mindful of those things. I think that's it.
Yeah, Uday, anything else you would add, or any areas that you've seen people talk about looking for benefit that are a little non-classic for IT projects that GenAI kind of gives a unique opportunity to start providing value somewhere in the organization that classic IT hasn't been able to address too much? Anything that sticks out?
Yeah, I would I think one space where folks are starting to test that is knowledge management. And I think there's some products that are starting to come out where
Sure.
I'm a big believer that the narrower the problem space, the more vertical, the more thin the slices, the better job you can do in terms of the outcomes that you have. So again, typical organizations, Fortune 500s, are sitting on tons of Confluence and knowledge documents and things like that. Like, let's build a model, train on that, and then open that up. Because today, searching for stuff is a pain, but searching once you get the results of the search, it is the experience of consuming that content is also nightmarish. So there is, I think, an opportunity for generative AI to go solve that. I think the one other thing I want to touch on is when I think of business cases, I feel like we often get carried away in like painting this rosy picture, like, it must have a positive ROI. Well, great, but I also want to know, what are the assumptions you're making on this? And number two, what is the downside? What are the risks, right? Where can stuff go wrong, right? Where's the risk to, for brand erosion or loss of customers? Of course, hopefully you're not placing a big bet, a huge bet, and placing a small bet. But again, I think we need to make sure that we're looking at that side of the story as well as we're evaluating and comparing business cases.
Yeah, and I think as you guys have kind of brought to light too, sometimes it might just be a strategic investment to learn. And so these initial cases may not be where you're going for ROI today, and you've got to defend that into the organization as here's where we're making an investment because there is a future ROI, but we're not entirely sure what or how much or where yet. So we're investing today to get those answers so we can really start developing a more clear ROI. So Ashish, I wanted to come back to you. What industries are up for disruption from your point of view for GenAI besides the Google search engine apparently?
I think almost everything, right? So if you had asked me the other way around, like what is not up for disruption, that'll be a harder question to answer.
Okay.
But I think in this case, like pretty much everything, right? We just talked about like artists, any kind of artist, they kind of can get disrupted. Like somebody can just produce new music, just feeding data.
Right.
And, like they just produce a new album in like 5 minutes, right? Done. So and think about other, like obviously these are very common use cases that everybody can think about. I want to dive deeper and think about other areas, right? Think about deep space. Think about like scientific research where this can be helpful. And now, if you talk about disruptions, think about like lawyers, right? The biggest job of lawyers are writing up these contracts, and like if you can train a Gen AI model specifically, they can write up those contracts very, very quickly. Again, I'm talking about like using it as a tool, so lawyers don't have to spend like weeks of time to draft up that document.
Minutia.
They can generate that in like few minutes, right? Think about finance manager. Like like finance industry is up for disruption too, right? Like you need financial advisors. Like what about an AI model who can give you, like, who knows your details and just spits out like, hey, this is what you need to do. Things like that. So those industries. Think about like healthcare. Like those industries, I think these are the kind of industries where people might not be thinking as much. Like I think for healthcare, like you probably saw the like news that Google and both Amazon and Google have released like their products that would sort of summarize all their patient history, create like TLDR version of it. And that's just a start, right? Like it can go up to where like they are prescribing stuff, right? Hey, this is what you have. Like you can go get this medication, right? Things like those. Again, that's where we have to draw the line, like risk tolerance, probabilistic nature of these products. So we'll have to see how far we can take it. But like in theory, all these industries can be disrupted.
Yeah. Uday, industries that you've been closer to, or some projects that you've gotten engaged in, things that you've kind of been surprised and learned and kind of non-traditional?
Yeah, I think the one thing of disruption, I also think of like, what is the opposite of disruption? Is it innovation? Is that the opposite? because for something to get disrupted, somebody has to innovate, right?
Okay.
But I think, like, can we say that the government space is fairly insulated from this? They're a monopoly, right? But again, GenAI can be a disruptor or a source of innovation internally within their process, right? So again,
Sure.
it can be an enabler as opposed to a disruptor. So I think if you think of highly regulated industries,
Okay.
and Ashish touched on both healthcare and finance. I think they are highly regulated, but they also have lots of opportunities to bring GenAI.
Yeah.
I think that's where we have to sort of tread the water a little carefully, things like that, because that regulation oversight would just continue to tighten on certain things, whether we are doing underwriting or whether we're doing. I think underwriting is a great example because
Yeah.
it has a lot of implications, and I know Zahi touched on these unintended consequences that often happen. And imagine Capital One underwriting their cards, and all of a sudden they're declining a bunch of transactions that really should be approved, or their models or the GenAI technology they're using that is showing bias towards one versus the other. And that's the reason you would never use GenAI to do underwriting. That is just it's not. Things like classification and sentiment analysis maybe, but underwriting and fraud detection would never be solved with GenAI. You'd go to classic ML, machine learning, because that is structured way of doing things, and that requires a structured technique as opposed to other use cases that are more low stakes and can be done with unstructured models.
That's good.
Just want to add one thing. I think, Uday, isn't the feature of a deterministic model, like you can have a deterministic outcome, right? I think that's probably what you were kind of going for, right? Generative AI is more undeterministic and
100%.
can generate like new and hallucinate, right? But deterministic models are this is exactly what we are looking for.
Yeah, another way to say that is with an ML model which is highly trained, every prompt will give the same response, right? And with a GenAI model, the same prompt can give you different responses.
You're right.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you solve.
That's the outcome you're looking for, not the opposite of what you're looking for. Yeah, good. Those are helpful kind of compare contrast. Zahi, industries that you've been touching that we should think about? We got finance and healthcare clearly.
I'll add up to my esteemed colleagues' answers and say that maybe the approach should be not in which industries and verticals it can be most impactful, but across which functions, right? Okay. And we spoke about it, like marketing, right? Yeah. Marketing can definitely use generative AI, and customer support, of course, and finance. I think perhaps the best way to a better approach or a better way to frame it would be to ask yourself, okay, what is GenAI? How can it help in general? And if you can say it can do three things very, very well. First of all, structure data, that is take huge piles of text, for example, of images, and make sense of them. Make a JSON object, say this is the summary, this is the title, these are who spoke, and length, and so on. That's one thing. Another thing is, of course, generating content.
Right.
And the third thing is interacting.
Okay.
So once you have that in mind, you can say okay, so how can it help me in the healthcare domain? So for example, you can say okay, maybe in highly regulated and scrutinized industries such as healthcare, I can apply GenAI not to generate statements, but to evaluate statements. So that the next time someone is saying take this drug and live forever, you can say, no, actually, you need to say so and so. It has to adhere to these regulations. You need to provide this spec, and so give you guidance. And likewise for insurance, for example, to ask yourself to guide a customer support agent to make sure that they stick to a certain script, and so on. So think in those ways, and not on a particular industry, because again, GenAI is applicable practically everywhere.
Yeah, functional. Okay, well, that's great. I appreciate that contrast. Uday, back to you. How can businesses stay updated with the rapidly evolving landscape of GenAI? I mean, it's daily, intraday, there's a lot of news going on. So
Yeah.
how do you overcome the noise?
Yeah, this space, updates and breakthroughs are coming fast and furious. I mean, literally, like, everybody around the globe is working on something interesting, and they are trying to get that in front of people's eyes. So yeah, there is a problem of plenty. And how do you? Well, one is keeping up with it. Number two is, or even the more fundamental question is, how do you start? Where do you start? What is the 101 lesson 101 on this? I'll talk about my journey. I'm not your traditional AI guy, but I'm just curious because I come with a product background and that's how I'm wired. So to me, when there were these early rumblings of ChatGPT,
right?
I find out, I heard about ChatGPT before I heard about OpenAI.
Yeah.
So again, OpenAI has been doing their magic in their garage, in their labs, and then finally they have something interesting to put it out there. So of course that's logical. You first see that application before you go figure out, who these folks are. So I think the key is to sort of one is keep an eye on some of the leading players over here and what's coming out of their shop. So whether that is Meta, whether that's Google, OpenAI, there's a bunch of open source work going on. There's Hugging Face and things like that. So just, you could just be following them on LinkedIn, or you might have Substack or some of the other sources where you could be following those conversations.
Okay.
Number two, if you want to get a little more hands-on, of course, there's Coursera and Google and on all those guys, they have their own learning sort of modules.
Yeah.
Of course, I forgot to mention the likes of Snowflake and Databricks, who are also fast and furious. There's been some interesting sort of activity and acquisitions that's going on. And then you've got the leading consulting companies out there who are building we're investing quite a bit in building those capability practices. And they've got, again, some primers and best practices on their websites that you could be reading up on. I think collection of that is really what you can get you started in terms of just wrapping your head around what is this space. I'll give you one example. Just this morning, somebody who is fairly technical and is, they put something on LinkedIn where there was a book. Somebody had written a book on LLMs and they were promoting that. And a subtitle in the book was almost implying that ChatGPT and LLMs are in the same category, as opposed saying that ChatGPT is an LLM. To me, ChatGPT is an application, not a large language model, right? The model that supports ChatGPT is GPT. So LLM is the GPT piece, but ChatGPT itself is an application. So again, that's a small nuance, but again, a lot of folks use that interchangeably.
Right.
But if you don't start going under the covers, you're not going to know them distinguish. You won't be able to distinguish between the two.
Right.
And there are multiple layers. I'm sure Ashish and Zahi can talk more intelligent to that than me, but I'll just stop there.
Good. Well, Zahi, I'll just kind of turn it over to you. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff in all of the noise that's out there? I mean, there's so much content coming out right now.
Yeah, first of all, this is an exciting time for technologists, innovators, and geeks. The pace of news and advancements in generative AI is just mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. So it can be intimidating, it can be overwhelming. How do I get started? How do I stay on top of things? Two approaches. In addition to what Uday just mentioned, I think as an organization, I would first of all encourage people at my organization to experiment. Yep. That's the best way to learn about it. Experiment, and then give them the tools, give them like subscription to Coursera or whatever to learn, give them the resources on AWS or whatever to run solutions, and so on. Experiment on ChatGPT, experience on Claude, upload documents and see how it works. So that's number one. Number two, as the organization becomes more systematic about it, you would probably start with a center of excellence that will steer the activities, the activities and learning. And over time, it will evolve into a beacon of knowledge, a way to disseminate and share knowledge across the organization, because it's so vital, because there are so many changes. So you need to find a productive way to make sure that everyone is sharing the information, sharing the learning, sharing the insights that they've gathered by working on those experiments and applications. I can go on, but we have a limited time. Rick, want you to continue, or should we move to the next question?
Rick, I think you're on mute.
Rick, are you on mute?
Yeah, sorry, my real world phone was actually ringing, which hasn't happened for about 2 years. So, Ashish, any kind of additions that you have, kind of where you're getting information and how to find good content? I like Sahai, just get out, get your hands dirty is a great answer too, because you don't even know what to go look for until you start digging in.
Yeah, I think definitely just use reliable sources, right? So I think Uday talked about Coursera, like some of these reputed websites, news channels and things like those. Obviously, you need to build expertise in the house for an organization. I think Sai kind of talked about it. I don't necessarily have, on a very, very high level, right? In the course of time, we can chat. I think those would be the two things I would do in an organization. Define the sources that we're gonna use, have a center of excellence, right? Have a team who can kind of weed out differences, because it's very hard, right? We're living in a world of GenAI where content can be created from that too.
Yeah, sure. Good. So as a high it's a bit of a build on this. What are the challenges you're seeing kind of associated with GenAI adoption, and what are some thoughts on mitigating that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of overarching challenges and risks. The first one is on the organizational level, as you actually embrace it, is you run the risk of being on two sides of the spectrum. Either, as I said earlier, wait and see and do nothing. Sure. During which time your competitors will catch up with you, will create a differentiation which will be very difficult for you to catch up with. That's number one. Or number two, or on the other side, you invest too many resources, you go all in too much and too fast, without any clear strategy and direction to guide you. And what will most likely will happen as a result is that you will lose your patience. You lose lots of money, you lose lots of patience, you will lose lots of motivation internally within your employees, because many things will fail and you want to understand why, and you want to experiment on them and learn from those mistakes. That's in a high level one challenge with the adoption, which is why the strategy, coming up with a steering committee is so important before you have to start investing resources and increase your exposure. The second thing, which is more inherent to the technology itself, is some of the things that we discussed earlier. Hallucination that is providing with inaccurate results to your customers. Data, right? Most of the organizations here will use proprietary data.
Right.
And that means it's a closed model, it's a black box. You don't know which data it was trained on. As a result, the data and the output coming from the model can be biased, can infringe on the IP rights.
Yeah.
So that's another concern. And a third one is the style, if you will, of the output, right? It's not very likely, but still you need to be cognizant of the fact that the style and the rhetoric and the output itself can be insightful, can contain things that you don't align well with your values as a company. So those are some of the, and finally, of course, data privacy, right? You might run the risk, whether you use a proprietary or an open model, but you feed into that model your own proprietary data, you might expose sensitive information, PIIs. So you need to be aware of it. There are good solutions out there. You would probably want to adopt a methodology that's starting from policies and education within the company, and plus adding tools and guardrails before and after the model, so to speak, to make sure that you don't expose sensitive data, that you don't expose yourself to what is called prompt injection attacks.
Oh yeah,
and so on.
That's a lot to think about. Ashish, just kind of driving adoption, getting people to get started or think about how they should get started. What are your suggestions for them to kind of classically get underway, and how have you seen people drive some adoption and overcome some of those? You know, there is all of this fear and concern, and a lot of us react to that, right? And there's this promise of opportunity and such. So in your conversations, how have you kind of inspired people to drive the adoption side a little bit while balancing that reservation?
Yeah, no, I think Zai touched on very important concerns here, right? And like aside from that, like cost and knowledge, those are two fundamental concerns for an organization, right? So, and then like defining where they want to use these technology. I'll go back to like our previous conversation, like how and where they're going to use this technology. So I think navigating companies would be like start small, right? You don't want to go and like dream up a big thing and just start and go big and then realize like you can't do it, or it's not possible, right? So I think and obviously like inform yourself, right? Again, going back, like set up a center of excellence where that team can kind of navigate the organization of these harmful effects, right? So some of these things like like there is another field of study that's going on, specifically not in GenAI but AI models, where like people are doing researches where from the output they can go back and infer back the original data, right? So like that's scary. Think about it, right? So you train a model on a data, and just because of the output, you can sort of reverse engineer the original data, and it could be proprietary data. Now in Gen AI model, it's gonna be much harder, but like that's also a concern. So I think the first thing is just educating the team, the company, the organization, have few people who really understand it, either hire them and train them, upskill them, right? And go slow. Those would be my recommendations.
Okay, good. Uday, anything for adoption that you want to add in there and kind of?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would want to add is that, I mean, adoption, if I was to play it forward, adoption, we're adopting it for the sake of something, right?
Yeah.
And to make a stronger business case, I would say, guys, we're going to adopt this for an internal use case, not a market-facing use case, right?
Right.
I think that's when you can start lowering the risk or the blast radius, right? If something messes up, it's internal, right? It's like I'm not putting some customer mistake, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, and I think both Ashish and Zahi touched on this. Find those internal use cases that can amplify your productivity, your velocity, reduce risk, reduce defects, 2x, 3x, 5x productivity, things that just use GenAI as an enabler, and then look at adopting it. I think you probably have more joy and success doing that. And then that can give you the confidence to then go bigger and bolder and maybe go do something which is external facing.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Just kind of let's find a way to identify that anxiety, fear, and then let's manage that down as you're kind of sharing, so that people can put that, we can have some reservations, it's fine, but let's not inhibit all innovation or even engagement simply because of those fears. So those are some good recommendations. Speaking of the fears, Ashish, other thoughts that we've kind of been dancing around, and you were talking a little bit about risks and concerns, but everybody's touched on, I think, some different examples and use cases and how to manage it. But I'm just wondering, if I open up the floor to talk about risks and concerns for a minute, is there anything that you've learned that you kind of have as an early principle to get everybody in the room aware? You know, the flip, right? Love all the energy. Everybody's got an AI and ML strategy for every company, right? If you don't, you're in trouble. At the same time, we can't just rush off into the woods and go create things. We could harm ourselves. So when you're creating the, hey, let's pause for a moment and just think about, be purposeful and cautious. What are some of the concerns, risks that you've bumped into, particularly some things that maybe people haven't thought about?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched upon it, as you said, like, but I'll start off, like, reset the conversation on this, right? Why they are risks? I think we should be, first of all, like, level set our understanding. The biggest risk for GenAI model is the data it's trained on, right? So, and that's its biggest strength too, right? So we talked about hallucination. We talked about, like, GenAI has capabilities to fill the gap. So for instance, in a regular traditional AI model, if it doesn't know, it hasn't seen that data, it's going to predict and it's going to say, like, I have low confidence. GenAI is just going to say, like, here's the answer, right? So just results, right? And that's what we call hallucination, right? That's where hallucination comes from, where it's just creating that gibberish information that may not make any sense, or it may just make up facts, right? So those are the concerns that come up with GenAI, right? What are the risks? Like, the biggest risk, like, I'm not gonna go back to what Zahi said, like, he talked about it, but I just want to touch on bias, right? Bias is such a huge risk with these models. Like, I'm going to explain why I'm saying it. So we have seen like, political dilemma that we've been in, right? Think about now, somebody trains a model with one-sided information, right? And then somebody starts getting like, asking questions from that model trained on that biased information. They're just gonna get that biased opinion, right? And, like, you have to understand, like, we are in technology, we understand the nuances of these things, but people who are consuming this information, they are getting more biased by that information, because they are saying a system who knows most of the information, it has infinite memory, it has infinite processing, it just gave me this information, so it has to be right? I'm not getting it from one specific person who can be biased. So they're not even aware of this biases, right? That's why, like, that this bias and this perspective is so much more important, and it's a huge concern, and hopefully we address it. The other thing is, like, training data, right? Again, Zahi kind of talked about it. What concerns me more right now about training data is most of the training data we've used in GenAI models have been produced by humans, right? Been vetted, they've been there, it's creative and all those things, right? Eventually, when all these models are producing new content, that may start getting into the training model and training of these GenAI models too. Research has shown, as soon as it starts happening, eventually in several iterations, GenAI models would start producing gibberish again. Right? I'm sure, like, we'll get around with it, but, like, that's another risk, right? That we would eventually have pollution coming from the output from GenAI models into the training model, and what would happen there, right? Again, it can influence more bias, it can create, like, hallucination or make up facts, things like those. So that's another risk. The other is, like, that's one we haven't talked about, right? Harmful content. Like, now we can produce new audios, we can fake audios. We all know about deep fakes, hopefully, and we know, like, people can just make up like, you just give, like, few photos of yourself, and you can just say, like, you're present somewhere you were never there, right? And, like, people can make up these facts, make up these evidence of you, and, like, that's another risk. The other risk is, like, next level of phishing attacks, right? Think about like somebody getting a call from their spouse or child or something like that, and some deep fake audio is asking them to share their personal information, privileged information, and they hear their voice and they say like, yeah, that's my daughter, that's my son, I'm gonna share this information with them. So this creates an opportunity for ill-minded people to kind of, so these are the harmful effects of Gen AI. And like, while we know these tools existed, right? So we know Photoshop existed. You could have edited things, all those things. Video editing tools existed for decades. The thing still was not that clean, and then you needed very specific skills and trainings and tools and computers in order to even do this, right? So there was sort of a barrier to entry for these society to create these harmful content. But with Gen AI, like, you go to like any of these tools, Midjourney and all those things, right? And just prompt up and give them the images, and you can just generate whatever you want, right? So that's another thing that I'm more concerned about, right? That's overall what's going on with Gen AI. I'm sure, again, as a society, we'll probably figure out guardrails for these.
Good. Well, let me pause for a second just to let the audience know we're about 10 minutes left in the conversation. So if you have questions for the panelists, please submit them, and I'll look to kind of aggregate up some themes and share them across. And also, if you want to share what models you or your company are using, if there's some themes there too, I can have the audience just talk about any experience they have specifically and things that they can share with you. So now I'm starting to get, the questions are starting to roll in.
Rick, I can take, I think I saw one on tools and frameworks. I can take a crack at that, if that's okay.
Terrific, please.
Yeah, so, and again, this has been some recent research and study of that. So again, this sort of piggybacks on some of the risk and challenges that Ashish and Zahi were talking about. So there, certainly one place I would like to shine the light on is a bunch of research, cool research that Stanford has done, and they've got this framework called HELM, which is the holistic evaluation framework for learning models.
Okay.
What that provides you is, so what HELM is doing is it's horse racing the top 30 LLMs out there and benchmarking them across like 50 or 60 different attributes. And what's it saying? So it's got a leaderboard out there.
Wow.
And so the way I, as a student or consumer of this, can learn from this, I can look at who are the leaders, but more importantly, how is a academic body benchmarking these tools and technologies, and what do these attributes look like? So I can learn from that, and I can embrace some of those attributes. 50, 60 is a lot of attributes to use for fine tuning. That's going to even go crazy. So pick like your top 3 or 4, and you can bring that. That's one. And then the second one, of course, is looking at again, I've been following Google a fair amount, but they have they've got their sort of ethical AI framework, which talks about a few different things, but it also talks about something called adversarial testing, which essentially means that if you're going to be in the business of building products, Gen AI products, you have to also try and break it yourself, right? Before you put it on the market, right? The final thought I have is that this is one idea which is a bit provocative that I've been floating out there, is this universal circuit breaker. It's just like, imagine a circuit breaker that's in your house.
Right.
When electricity surges, it cuts electricity supply so that it doesn't cause harm, right? It's the same thing. If there was a global universal circuit breaker that every Gen AI product producer had to plug in to their prompt and the response, that could be another sort of guardrail that could be in place. So despite OpenAI's effort sincere effort to make sure that their
Sure.
product is honest and trustworthy, and has no. There's still one final guardrail out there that can prevent that harmful content from falling, getting out there, and of course falling in the wrong hands.
Good, excellent, thank you. We could stay on the tools and framework. That there's a number of other questions, but at the end of the day, I think people are trying to understand, like, what are specific things that I should think about to go use, to go try. So there's any recommendations, as much as it doesn't have to be a product specifically, but places to go or products that you do feel like are a good start point or learning point, or more enterprise than personal?
Yeah, absolutely. If you wish to build proof of concepts, demos, solutions, you should probably go to LangChain. LangChain is the de facto most popular GenAI framework. It offers lots of integrations, lots of flexibility in building an end-to-end GenAI solution. It abstracts away a lot of the complexity or complexities that are involved in building an application. It has a very rich documentation and examples. And it also offers Langsmith. So Langsmith is a way for you to track what's going on, to trace the different calls that you make to the GenAI, to what the model, be it ChatGPT 3.5 or ChatBison by Google, or Bedrock, or anything else. It shows you which parameters you use, the prompt that you use, how much time it took for you, so talking about performance and so on. It also allows you to evaluate the overall responses, or quality of the responses, and over time. So imagine you give it a list of good answers for a set of questions.
Right.
So you actually can use GenAI to evaluate the performance of GenAI.
All right.
And then it will take that and compare those good expected outcomes to the actual outcomes, to say, like, this was very close, or it was completely different. And by using such mechanisms and applying notification layers on top of it and alerts, you can be on top of things to know what's going on. So all in all, LangChain should be your starting point. Not necessarily, you won't necessarily want to use them for production. It can be bloated sometimes, and it's a very opinionated framework. But start there. And I would suggest, if you don't have any significant in-house expertise in GenAI, talk with a consultant. Talk with someone that will help you strategize your approach. That's it.
Good, I appreciate that. Ashish, any projects that you've kind of taken end to end, or any other tools that you think people should be aware of when they're kind of contemplating how to get started, where to get started?
Yeah, I think I'll talk about like a couple of tools, right? So Amazon AWS has like a bunch of marketplaces for AI models. Hugging Face is another option. Google has it. Like, I think there is a ton of resources people can use to find the models that they're looking for. In terms of project, like, I personally don't have directly a project since I've started, like, but I can talk about one of the projects that was just implemented in Amazon, which is to help marketers to market their products. So they can come up with an image, like they can generate images and like create marketing content of that image right in the real time. Because like in Amazon, like they have a theory when the seller is selling their product, it is highly correlated to the quality of images that they have, right? So and it's hard to produce, like they spend a lot of money. Now suddenly that time and money that they have to spend is shortened quite a bit, because like you can just use GenAI within Amazon and just produce these images for customers to see, right? So that's another end-to-end kind of use case. It just went like a GA I think a day or two ago. So
perfect. Well, gentlemen, we are at the top of the hour. This has been a lot. It's a dense subject, so I really appreciate you guys stepping through it. I think this is what a lot of people, as we've been going around, are looking for. Just want to get a bit of a foundational understanding and know a little bit of the universe. And And I appreciate the shout out that reaching out to a consultant, if you're looking for somebody that's touched many of these projects before, is a great way to save skinning your knee. And we can save you the pain or anguish that any one of us have already suffered and get you off on the right foot. So again, very grateful for your time today and sharing a lot of your experience with us, and grateful to the audience for you taking an hour out of your day. Hopefully this has been very valuable. If you have any questions or want to reach out, you found us in LinkedIn, obviously. If you know us outside of that, you can reach out to any one of us. And Pronix, obviously, grateful for your time. And with that, I think we'll wrap up and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.